Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast, CISO Talk Saturday special. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate your support. We have a very, very special episode today. I call it the CISO that does it all because he really does do it all in his current role, and he's got a lot of things that he has to deal with and battle every single day. So we're going to talk a lot about that today and how he manages it all. But before we get started today, we wouldn't get to where we are today without the support of our sponsors. So before we get started with Sean Walls, the CISO at Visionworks, take this short break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to get started on our episode today. Hey everyone, I really want you to help me in supporting our early sponsor, Get Smarteye. So Get Smarteye still in beta testing, but what Get Smarteye is, it's an amazing app that lets you control your privacy, whether it be documents, pictures, anything that you want to share with your friends or not. Think of Snapchat, only no screenshots and no one else looking over it. So if you travel a lot, if you're in airports, coffee shops, shared workspaces, and you care about your privacy, Get Smarteye is the right app for you to protect your privacy. And here's the deal. Get Smarteye is still in beta testing. I use the app all the time. In fact, some of you know that I travel a lot, and when I do, I don't like people looking at my screen at airports. I do everything off my phone, and as such, I use Get Smarteye for all my sensitive documents and all my planning. So here's what you need to do to be one of our early technology adapters, an exclusive offer for CyberHub Engage listeners. Text 41411, again, that's 41411, 41411, and type in the message of your text, Smarteye. Then reply to the SMS that you're going to get with the letter Y, like Yankee, and download the Apple Test Flight app. Then go back to your SMS and you'll get a link to download the Smarteye app. Download the Smarteye app and use it. Again, this is an early offer for only CyberHub Engage users. Text 41411. Again, that's 41411 with Smarteye in the message. Hey friends, want to talk to you guys about our new sponsor, PlexTrack, and its founder, Dan Teklaus. So Dan Teklaus founded PlexTrack after 15 years of fighting with reporting and vulnerability management tools as a penetration tester and CISO. Dan knew that the best red teams not only needed a way to produce good, consistent reports quickly, but also wanted to be able to generate and catalyze the success of the organization they work with. That's why PlexTrack went beyond customizing Word and PDF reports to become a purple teaming platform. Through a central interface, red teams are able to report issues, blue teams are able to remediate them, and the CISO gets an overview of everything that's going on so he can report it up to his board, his stakeholders, and anyone involved in the organization on a consistent basis. As a CyberHub Engage listener, you get the opportunity to try PlexTrack for absolutely free for 1 month. No contracts, no credit cards, no risk, none at all. Simply go to plextrack.com/CyberHub. Again, that's plextrack.com/CyberHub. PLEXTRAC, no K in plextrack.com/CyberHub to claim your free month free now. Make sure you support our friends at PlexTrack. They have a great platform for all of you that are pen testers and red and blue teams. Make sure you check them out again. plextrack.com, no K in plextrack/CyberHub. Folks, I want to take a moment and talk to you about CyberHub USA, one of our longest sponsors. So for full disclosure, before we get started, I want you to know I am a partner at CyberHub USA. That's why our podcast is called the CyberHub Engage Podcast. But if it wasn't for my partner support, I wouldn't have been able to deliver the content that we do each and every single day. But let me talk a bit about what CyberHub USA does and how it can benefit you and your organization. CyberHub USA are cyber business operation experts. They help bridge business and cybersecurity to enhance a company's security posture through so many different ways of doing so. As a boutique advisory and consulting firm, they work with CISOs, CIOs, CTOs, CEOs, and board members on identifying the proper and right cybersecurity strategy and do everything in between, from creating work plans to identifying the right vendors, to helping in budgeting, to ensuring third-party viability, to helping with tabletop exercises and preparedness for the day when it happens, not if. CyberHub USA has a team of experts from all over the globe that's ready to deploy at a moment's notice to help any organization deal with the most complex or even the most basics of cybersecurity challenges. You can find out more by going to cyberhubusa.co. Again, cyberhubusa.co, cyberhubusa.co, and you can get a free consultation with one of CyberHub USA's experts for absolutely free by mentioning the CyberHub Engage podcast. Again, cyberhubusa.co, cyberhubusa.co. Get a free consultation for free with one of CyberHub USA's experts, absolutely free by mentioning the CyberHub Engage podcast. And now back to the show. Sean, thank you so much for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, James. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Man, so first of all, before we get started on your career, and we'll kind of get to that, it's really awesome to have you here. I think most people don't really understand what Visionworks really is as a company. People think of it as just that store in the mall where you go, you get your glasses and lenses, but you guys do so much more than that, right?
I think so, yeah. We definitely do. So we're a one-stop shop, a full-service provider when it comes to eye health or vision health. We right from the optometry visit to get your eyes checked, to get your retinas scanned, and the full soup to nuts there, to going to get your glasses picked out and purchased. And then of course we have manufacturing locations around the United States that create the lenses, fit them into the frames, and then of course deliver them to the stores or to your house or however you've opted to have them delivered. So we have about 711 locations, optometry shops, and retail outlets around the United States.
When you and I first spoke, I was amazed by, people obviously when they hear a name, they don't think of everything that goes in the background or what the business really does. And so I'm fascinated by this. I'm really excited. So as we kind of get started, would you mind sharing with our audience a little bit about how in the world did you get into cybersecurity? What was your journey into cyber?
Well, I started my career back before cyber was even a coined phrase, really. I mean, it wasn't even, it's not that it wasn't even popular, it didn't even exist and so I was in IT back in the 90s and did a lot of the jack of all trades kind of thing that if you've been in the industry or in the business long enough, you've probably experienced that. And then in the early 2000s, I landed a director of IT role. I did that for a few years for a mid-sized telephone company in the Midwest. And from there transitioned to a consulting position with Blackbox. And I don't know if you remember Blackbox, but it was that company that had that big fat 1,000-page magazine that had all the different connectors and wires and you name it, before everything kind of talked nice and before TCP/IP was kind of the standard protocol of choice for everything that talked computerese. It was kind of the go-to company. And while I was there, a few things happened in the industry, in business in general. We had Enron, we had WorldCom. Remember those big disasters,
right.
Those financial disasters. And as a result of that, SOX 404, or Sarbanes-Oxley was passed. And there was a section of it called SOX 404, which was the kind of the technical security part of it. And Blackbox, being a publicly traded company, had to adhere to that. And nobody had really gone down this path. It was a net new thing for everybody in the industry. And so we were kind of feeling our way through it, and they needed somebody to step up and help with that process. And we were a multi-billion-dollar company with a global footprint. And I raised my hand and said, sure, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And prior to that, I'd been doing all kinds of things from a security perspective, building firewalls and IDS and data centers and so on. But that was the first real exposure to a concrete framework of governance and security controls that go beyond the technical, that touched into the administrative and organizational aspects of security, the policies, the standards, the processes. And it really kind of, a light bulb went off in my head, and I kind of seen the future of cybersecurity, and it intrigued me, it excited me, and awoken a passion in me. And from there, I consulted for another 7 or 8 years, doing everything from building governance programs for organizations, helping them with compliance, PCI, HIPAA, doing pen tests, doing social engineering attacks, you name it, risk assessments. For some of the larger companies, I went from there to Presidio and spent a tenure there as well. consulting for large international companies, and it really kind of rounded out my game and prepared me for the last say 10 or 12 years where I've been in leadership for cybersecurity for organizations here in the States.
It's really interesting because your career path, you really kind of were consulting and you did that for a while, and now you're a CISO. And a lot of times, people, consultants, oftentimes one of the common things you hear is they struggle in their pursuit of working with their customers. So what would you tell a consultant about what do they need to know about working successfully with a CISO, being that now you're a CISO and before that you were a consultant? What would you tell your old self as a CISO today to be successful?
Yeah, and I think I kind of learned it the hard way, I guess, as every consultant probably does when they first start out. They walk in and they think that they're going to be the subject matter expert and talk really technical and be that hero that impresses everybody in the room. And the CISO is going to say, time out, hold on for a second. First step is you need to understand my business. And because everything when you're at the CISO level or VP of Information Security, it has to tie back to the business. So if you're coming in as a consultant or a salesperson that's trying to sell me consulting or solution services, if you don't ask me about my business, what's critical to my business, how we're trying to leverage this technology to advance the business or the initiatives of the company, you've missed the boat. And so taking a step back, being a little less technical. Not every CISO is technical. As a matter of fact, I'd say more than half are probably not. And so tone back the technical stuff. And if you want to be a successful consultant when you're dealing with CISOs, understand the business. Have some business acumen. Develop that. Go back to school and take a business course, and be able to speak to the business. Talk about dollars and cents. Talk about tying back to business strategy and things along those lines.
So when you're choosing a CISO role as a consultant, and a lot of times we see that transition from going from someone who's maybe more on the vendor side, and then they end up kind of going into the practitioner side. What are what's important that you should look at? What's the difference that you should understand from coming from maybe a consulting and a vendor side to being within an organization and kind of being dedicated to one role? What are some of the things that other people should be aware of?
Okay, that's a really good question, and that's I think it's easy, but it's a complex answer. So the first thing that I would say is that when you're in a CISO role, I mean, you're in for the long haul. You're not in for a very short, focused engagement with a defined scope. You're in and out, nobody gets hurt kind of approach. You're in there for the long haul. So there's politics, there's relationships that have to be built, and when you're a CISO, if you don't have the relationships, you're not going to get your job done. So, making sure that you have buy-in from the business, you develop those relationships, and you reach beyond just the IT department and the security department, and reach into the business and look for relationships with stakeholders and other folks within the organization.
So I kind of want to go to a different question, which is, more, you're kind of new in your role now. You just got started at Visionworks. And before we go into that, I think, a lot of times we think of consultants as, like you said, the people who come in and they kind of want to, they're subject matter experts. They know how to do everything. Or they're really good at at this just one or two or three different things. But how do you as a CISO kind of take a step back and examine your business? What do you do to kind of be critical of your own operation, maybe be your own consultant? Does that make sense? Like, what do you do to do that, if any?
It does make sense, because I've gone through that process several times, and I just recently finished that with Visionworks. And so, the first thing, and I'll keep saying this over and over again, but it's to understand the business. So making sure you understand your critical assets, the controls that are in place. So you do a mini risk assessment, and if the organization is structured properly, and not all organizations are, but if it is, you should have some sort of delineation or segmentation from IT, and have some autonomy, so you can actually look at the way things are configured and have some sort of objectivity when looking at that. So you have to perform that risk assessment, because everything needs to be looked at in terms of vulnerabilities, threats, the likelihood of impact based on, how you could exploit that vulnerability and the controls you have in place to mitigate that. And then, of course, business impact. So once you determine the likelihood and the business impact, you create this risk register that, isn't just a laundry list of vulnerabilities necessarily, but it's traced back to root cause of the gaps in your processes. A lot of times, for example, if you run a vulnerability scan and you have hundreds of missing patches that are associated with Flash or Adobe or Java or whatever, those are vulnerabilities, and then those are different than a risk that might be you have a broken enterprise-wide patch management process, and you want to make sure that you go back and you fix the root and you analyze it from that perspective. So it's a little bit deeper, a little bit wider than what you would expect, or what you maybe normally would do just with a vulnerability sort of assessment. Then you got to look at different aspects of the business. Every organization has different divisions, different functional groups, and each group has its own sort of goals and visions and focus and critical applications and processes that run that part of the business. My light just went out. I don't know if you noticed that, but 1 second. Yeah, I have one of those, if I stand still too long, then my light will go out. So I apologize if it came back on. So anyway, so you look at these different functional groups and understand what's important to these folks, because when you make decisions about risk and about treatment of risk, it's a business choice. After all said and done, at the end of the day, you need to go to the business owners, the ones who own those applications, and say, okay, here's the risk that we're carrying. Here are the treatment options that we have, and those can be a number of different things. It can be either we mitigate it, we remediate it, we eliminate it, we transfer that risk, or we accept it. And a lot of times that is an option. So I'm not interested in pointing the finger. I'm interested in solving problems in ways that align with the organization that I'm working for. For example, a financial company organization is going to have a really low risk appetite. They're not interested in carrying any risk, because everything that they do is about trust and that imaginary thing that they create with the public, that people that trust them will come and do business with them. So if they get hit, then that reputation gets tarnished, their game is over. Whereas a construction company might have a much higher risk appetite, and therefore when you make recommendations, their willingness to accept the risk as part of the kind of the cost of doing business might be much higher. So I don't know if I kind of went off on a tangent there, but the fact is that you look at things a little bit differently than just because I'm not analyzing necessarily my work. If the company is organized properly, I'm not configuring firewalls. I'm not doing the actual architecture work and the day-to-day engineering stuff. I'm actually managing the governance, risk, and compliance of the organization. And I work closely with IT, but I'm more or less auditing or assessing them and other parts of the business. That makes sense?
Absolutely. And that's, to me, it's always fascinating, because I feel like as a CISO, oftentimes people think, well, are you doing your own pen testing? No, I don't know of a CISO that sits and does his own pen testing, but it's how do you kind of sometimes just leave your own shoes, leave your own role, hire yourself as your own consultant, and kind of switch, sit in the guest chair in your office and be like, what do I see here from a consultant point of view? And sometimes that helps you kind of figure out the low-hanging fruit that you miss being so sunk into your specific role. And it also helps you kind of stretch your budget a little bit more.
It does. And I'm not saying that we don't do our own pen test internally from time to time. We have vulnerability management programs, so we run vulnerability scans on a regular basis. Then we take those results and parse them and break them down into kind of remediation tasks and so on. But we're not configuring the firewall per se, or we're not part of the DevOps team that pushes code out. So when I find a cross-site scripting, or I'm testing for those types of OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, I'm not testing myself, because there would be a conflict of interest there if I was, if that makes sense.
It does. So you're new in your role, obviously, at Visionworks. What's your first 90 days like when you take on a new role? What are some of, they say president's first 100 days determine his agenda, his presidency. So let's give you your first 90 days as a CISO. What determines your administration as a CISO?
Right, right. And that's a tremendous question. And I think there's some significant truth in what you just said. I think what holds true for the president does hold true for a CISO or even a CEO or anybody in an executive leadership position. And the number one thing that I would say is relationships. Relationships. When you walk in that door, you need to make sure that you're reaching across the desk and shaking hands with the right people, understanding, the business itself. And the only way to do that is to sit down with the CEO, with the senior vice presidents of various departments and divisions, the other VPs and directors, and not just interrogating them about the holes and the security risks and the compliance gaps that they see, but seriously developing relationships, asking them about their kids and their family, and it may sound weird, but I'm telling you, when you start developing relationships, it's what allows you, enables you, empowers you to implement your strategy down the road, because the business will make the choice as to whether or not to do this or to do that. And if they don't trust you, if they don't feel like you're legitimate and you have their best interest at heart, they're not going to, it's going to be an uphill battle for you, if you will. So the first thing is relationships and understanding the business. And the only way to do that is to really just invest in people and sitting down. And that's why, as a CISO, I'd say 50% of your job is interpersonal relationships, having those conversations, developing those rapport, and so on. So that if there's a new CISO out there and there's one thing I can tell them, when you start in that first 90 days, make sure you point to the people that are in leadership there and are influencers and decision makers, and make sure that you develop relationships and meaningful ones, not just superficial ones. So that's the first thing. So understanding the business and the business strategy, because the goals and the initiatives, it's all about dollars and cents, and it's all about strategy for the organization. And your security initiatives, your security recommendations need to align with those. And that's kind of a very abstract way to kind of say it, but if you were to if I was to give an example, for example, if the goal is to enhance the customer experience, for example, and you want to make sure that that's the best experience. Obviously protecting their data is going to be one thing. Making sure that you support the applications or protect the applications that make that whole process, that whole interaction with the organization seamless and smooth for the customer. If the organization has a strategy for getting into a particular market, or we'll say California, for example, where it's I wouldn't say highly, but it's regulated more than the rest of the United States because of CCPA, and so. If you have a compliance program that's efficient and well oiled, and it operates well, and then they give you the initiative of let's get into California, and you can spin up a compliance program that meets those regulatory obligations for that state quickly, and it can speed that the organization to that market quicker than the competition. You've created a value proposition for the organization. So making sure you understand the goals, and then so when you're making recommendations for controls, security has always been looked at as the department of no, right? We've always, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do this. Well, I suggest that we should change that name from the department of no to the department of how can I help? And when we're making recommendations for controls, we should be making recommendations that hinder the business as little as possible, minimize the risk, or bring the risk down to levels that are in line with the business, and empower and enable the business. And so you shouldn't just go in there with one option and maybe the most stringent type of control. Maybe you have the gold, silver, and bronze version of the controls or the recommendations, and maybe the one that the company goes with is the one that slows the business down the least, or it's kind of that balance between security and business. And so understanding the business and the critical assets and the goals of the organization will help you develop your security strategy and the recommendations that you make. And the relationships will help you implement that strategy that you put together. So it's believe it or not, it's political. It's when you get up to this level, it's about relationships. There's politics. It's business. If you don't understand business, if you can't speak dollars and cents, and you can't understand a P&L and a plan or a business strategy, then you're going to be struggling to be successful.
It's very interesting, because one of the things you started when we started this podcast, we talked about all the different parts of the current business that you own, all the different, from manufacturing to HIPAA to, there's just a typical CISO, I guess, in a typical organization. If you're in a financial institution, I've got to comply with FINRA and a few of the other regulations, and typically you know what you're signing up for. But in your current role, you own five different aspects of the business. How do you manage all of that? How do you stay informed as things change? Because I think you also own privacy, you also own compliance, you also own information security, and then under information security you have manufacturing, you've got healthcare, you've got just traditional security.
Yeah. And you mentioned enterprise architecture, by the way.
Yes, so, and you look very well rested. So I'm just wondering, how are you doing it all? How are you staying informed?
It's my makeup. I did good makeup today. Yeah. So that's a good question, and there's no hard fast answer except for I read a book when I was probably in my 20s, early 20s. It's called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm not sure if you've ever read it. Very popular back in the day. I think it's still relevant today. Written by a gentleman named Stephen Covey, and it talks about putting first things first and being proactive and being organized and setting goals, and it transformed my life, to be honest with you. And so the first thing I would say is if you're not organized, if you don't own your calendar and have the ability to ingest hundreds, like I'm talking hundreds of emails a day, and be able to parse through them, and the ones that are just noise, push them off to the side, the ones that you can get done in a minute or two, you do right on the spot, the ones that are going to take some thought, some research, to respond to, you flag them for follow-up, you make sure that when you're managing your calendar, you make time for what I call the important but not urgent things. So everything's about everybody's kind of a slave to the tyranny of the urgent. I don't know if you ever heard of that saying before, but it's, the phone rings, somebody texts you, the email pops up, and you're just constantly being distracted. We can never get into this deep work phase or this zone that allows us to concentrate and bring our mental faculties into, to hone them so that we can get some significant work done and be incredibly efficient. So for the, setting aside time, if you have on your list of things to do, like create we'll just say incident response plan or update the risk management program, you need to block those off on your calendar so that when somebody goes to book a meeting with you, that's blocked off, and you have time to sit in zone and just focus on getting those important things done. And so that would be one, a couple things, but also delegate. Hire people that are smart, that are competent, that you don't have to hold their hand, and be willing to delegate. Early in my career, I was a bit of a control freak. If you speak to people that knew me back then, they'll say, no, a bit's an understatement. I used to like hold on to everything, you know what I mean? And over the years, I realized that's not scalable. You can't scale when you do that. So if you can hire the right people, and you can delegate, and you can trust them to figure it out. You give them enough guidelines of what the output needs to be, what the idea is that you're trying to convey, and let them be creative, use their experience, their background and abilities to carry that out. It may not be the exact way that you would do it, but it would get done. And perfectionism is never it's a hindrance to productivity. So sometimes good enough is good enough, if you know what I mean. So you need to move that ball forward, and so I would think, I think that those are some things that help me to manage all these balls is delegating, managing my calendar, being organized, not getting caught up in the tyranny of the urgent, and be strategic. There was a guy that I met that once and he said, we need to Zoom. And I was actually in an interview, and I was talking to this guy, and I said, what's your management style? And he said, I Zoom. And I said, what is Zooming? That's a weird thing for you to say to me. And he says, well, when you're strategic and you're flying up at the 10,000 foot level, you need the ability to zoom down and have enough knowledge and understanding and an ability to understand what's going on, fix the problem, but don't stay down there in the weeds. You need to zoom back up, and you just stay. And so the job is to zoom, to keep the strategic vision and focus that you're trying to accomplish and head towards, and stay at that level, but zoom down and have enough ability and understanding of what's going on in your organization to be able to fix the problems and readjust as needed, and then zoom back up. So that's kind of what keeps me moving the ball forward and keeping those all those things up in all those balls in the air.
So Sean, we're in 2020. We're in kind of summarizing 2019. We head into this new year. Our old foe, and remains our foe, is ransomware. And with May's ransomware in December of 19, we saw it kind of, the bold and new way of, if you don't pay me, I'll publicly shame you. And I never expect media to really not play along with criminals, so it's no surprise that people it's headline stories for this long. But how do you view your ransomware? What are some of the things that every practitioner should know about ransomware and do when dealing with it? And then how do you explain ransomware, as rampant as it is, to other parts of the business and the threat it can bring and the risk it provides to business? What are some of the conversations you're having?
So I'm glad you brought that up. I personally think ransomware is one of I wouldn't say necessarily the top, but it's definitely in the top 1, 2, or 3 threats that we're dealing with in the wild. It's nasty, and it's a good example of cyber, I guess, hacking becoming commoditized. They're able to make money now. They finally figured out that viruses, back for what, 20 years, viruses, maybe 25 years, viruses were just going around messing stuff up. And for what reason? To what end? For nothing. And then hacktivists started coming around and making points and taking down websites. And then the criminal element and nation states started getting involved and saying, we can actually make money at this. And they figured it out. It took them a long time to figure it out, but they did. And that's a dangerous thing. So when you start commoditizing cyber threats and attacks like that, it's just going to get worse because people are going to get more and more creative. I read a thing a little while ago that they're actually there's ransomware as a service now. So these organizations, right. they've taken ransomware and they've created this software as a service sort of platform, and you can go there and you can sign up and you can do your own ransomware stuff and then have campaigns and make money at it, and you give them a little slice of every money you get or whatever ransoms you get. So what I would say is for organizations that are preparing for this, the conversation has to take place. Everybody talks about risk management and having, managing your organization from a risk perspective, but there's another approach, there's another viewpoint, and that's threat management. I mean, Lockheed Martin kind of started that whole sort of paradigm shift with the cyber kill chain and looking at your threats and saying how do they attack you and how can we mitigate the attack at various phases of it. And so we need to look at our threats, and we need to look at ways that we can stop it. And the scary thing about ransomware is that it attacks our data, and that's where our money is. That's how we make money, by the data that we have. And so, first of all, you can prepare. Or every organization needs to be aware of how ransomware works and the kinds of controls that you can put in place to one, limit your susceptibility to ransomware, and two, to maximize your ability to recover from ransomware. So, I mean, obviously limiting best practices from a ransomware defense perspective is limiting administrative access, making sure that you're patching, segmenting your network, make sure your backups are good, that your backups are segmented from the rest of your network, that you lock down shares, and you filter web and email and things like that, because it usually comes in through an email, through an attachment or a link, or somebody goes to a malicious site and they click on something, and that's how it gets on your network. So we can we're educating the end user too. So teaching them that, don't do this and don't do that. Here's what a threat looks like. Here's how to identify phishing attacks and that kind of thing. So those are some of the preventative things that you can do. You can have tools nowadays. Artificial intelligence, machine learning has come a long way in the past, say, 5 years or so. And so with next-gen antivirus and AI-enabled threat detection and endpoint detection and response, user behavior analytics, zero trust networks, I mean, these are all technologies that will help to recognize a ransomware attack, and see once that attack vector is identified, then shutting it down in real time, so that it only affects maybe that one machine or a few files. So it's all about processes, and it's about technology and training people. It goes back to the age-old people following processes and leveraging technology to implement security controls.
It seems one of the things around ransomware, and it always comes down to it and the response to it, and I think hackers and groups have picked up to it, is the fact that insurance companies 9 times out of 10 would rather pay the ransom and get it over with than actually fight it. And I think that's adding more and more challenges to the problem. I think that's adding more gasoline to the fire in the ransomware case, because a lot of these groups understand that if you've got insurance is most likely going to be your first phone call, and their first response is going to be like, how much are they asking for? Pay it, because we'd rather pay them $1 million than, take a $50 million claim to fix something.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem, and I agree. I had an interesting conversation on the CISO series with David Sparks, if you're familiar, and we touched on this exact topic, and it's so how do you stop that? Because you can say, okay, we're gonna not pay, but the guy down the street may be paying. These organizations that have weak controls and their entire business has been shut down, they're going to pay. You have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization to do what's in the best interest of the company, not the best interest of necessarily the better good for society. I'm not saying that that's not a noble pursuit, but how do we get everybody on the same page and and shut this down by making it illegal to pay, or almost like the United States government will not deal with terrorists, for example. They have a policy, and it's a nationwide thing, and it's just the way that they do business. And maybe we need to do that from a national perspective and make it illegal to pay these ransoms. That would force people to be more proactive, because now paying is not an option. But you're right. I think what you're doing is you're feeding the monster, because you're paying them, and they're saying we're getting paid, and we're getting paid in more and more frequently with these things, and it's just going to escalate and make them want to do it more and more often and look for more creative ways to deliver these malicious binaries and so on. So there's no fast, easy answer to that, because when you're the company that's got your data tied up by a terrorist like that or a threat actor like that, you're going to do anything that you can to get that data back and get business back to normal operation. So it's a tough question. It's a tough problem. And how do we solve it? I don't have the answer. But I do know we can do some things in advance to make sure that we minimize our susceptibility and our ability to recover. Because if you have good backups and they're segmented, you can then restore, and you don't have to worry about this. It's the companies that don't have, they kind of get caught with their pants down a little bit. And they're the ones that are desperate to get their data back because they don't have the recovery capabilities.
It's fascinating, because one of the main kind of sources, the smart threat actors are going after those MSPs and MSSPs that actually store your backups. So they're really kind of starting with kind of your back door, and they've made everyone rush to the back door. Meanwhile, we've left our front door unlocked, the window open, and no one's there to man what's coming through. And that's been kind of the trend that I've noticed with the last few ransomware attacks. They've all been very much backdoor driven.
Yep.
And the guys are getting in through the front door, through the very basics, through a basic email link to someone in a company because they've got your backups. And especially with the Maze ransomware, they're not just locking down your files. They're analyzing your files. They're running through them. They're sending you in the ransom note, we know you've got emails to so-and-so. We know you have so-and-so. They're studying the company. These guys they're business people, and they're negotiators, and they're leveraging information to ensure they get paid. And they're coming in through the back door, and we're so busy securing our back doors and worrying about those vulnerabilities, we've forgotten sometimes the basics, and that's how they're getting in. It's really not that difficult, as you've stated. It's fascinating for me. I can't wait to see how. A part of me is just thinking 2020 is going to be this year of where ransomware is just going to peak to a point where it becomes a presidential issue. I think as we're heading into an election year, I can picture a debate in September between the presidential candidates talking about ransomware.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. And I think that what you're going to see, not just ransomware, but cybersecurity in general, will become a battle, a political battle at some point, because at some point we're going to have to decide that cybersecurity, that technology in general is just too critical to our survival as a society, that we need to set some basic levels of security that every single organization that does business with any other human being on the planet needs to adhere to, and then scale it up from there depending on the criticality to society. And Obama tried that, of course, with the critical infrastructure, executive, the thing that he pushed through. But and then that kind of spawned and created NIST cybersecurity framework. But it really doesn't have any teeth at this point, and we're still waiting for something like that to be pushed down to the general population. And when that happens, we're still going to have, because as we evolve, they evolve. And you're right, they're smart people, they're business people. We call them criminal elements, we call them cyber terrorists, but they're not dumb. They're incredibly intelligent. Anybody that can write code like that and come up with these delivery mechanisms, they're smart, they're organized, they're resourceful, and they're strategic in what they're trying to accomplish. So we're up against a real threat, and the next 5 years is going to determine, because I'll tell you what's happening is emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computers are going to start coming into play. And the bad guys are already using them. They're leveraging them right now to do scans, to identify vulnerabilities, to identify high value targets, then to deliver payloads and get footholds, and then command and control activity then goes back to a handler. Before you know it, even the handler will be an AI algorithm that then pivots and moves laterally within the environment. So we're entering a brave new world, a very interesting age that's going to transform society as a whole, but cybersecurity in particular, because it's going to be machine-on-machine warfare that we're going to see here in the very near future.
Speaking of laws, a lot of people think that privacy equals security, or that security equals privacy. CCPA goes into enforcement July 1st of 2020. The trial period starts January 1st, and California, as being a state that's about to go broke, the Attorney General has come out and said, we're really going to enforce CCPA. We're not going to do the GDPR soft penalty things. You're in charge of privacy at your company. What are you doing with CCPA and all the other 12 or 13 different privacy laws? And what does the federal government need to know? Because, with data breach notification, we all know we have 50 states, 50 different AGs. We wish we had one federal body to go to that we can report a breach to that escalates it down to the state level.
Hold for 1 second, Ripta. I'm sorry. My CEO just walked in my office. I apologize.
Well,
and when that happens, you got to pause.
We do have to pause. So on the CyberHub Engage, we got the CEO of the company just coming in like, hey, Mister. So going back to the whole privacy, CCPA, all the different privacy laws, 50 different data breach notification laws. What is going to end up happening if we have 50 data breach notification laws? We have 50 privacy laws, all different, right? Because I'm guessing CCPA, while it's a standard for a lot of people, I've noticed that in other states, and I live in Georgia, talking to our legislature, they're like, yeah, we're not going to do something. CCPA hurts businesses. It doesn't really help businesses, and it doesn't really protect the consumer. What are you doing to protect on privacy? How is that impacting your operations? What's the cost of doing this? And are these privacy laws really changing the way companies handle it, or is it just another check mark in a box per se?
Okay. Very densely packed question. However, that was a good one. So let me ask, because you kicked it off with some people think that privacy is not security, and people say that. They say that compliance is not security. Totally agree. First of all, privacy, let's define it first. Not talking about general compliance, but privacy compliance. Privacy is about what am I allowed to do with the data that you've entrusted to me. So are you giving me personal information about you, your family, and whatever else, your demographics and so on. What am I allowed to do with that data? Who can I share that with? Can I sell that? Can I use it for other marketing purposes? Can I contact you? And that kind of thing. And what these privacy laws are trying to accomplish is they're trying to give back ownership of our digital souls, if you will. So they're trying to say that, James, Sean, you own your data online. You own your online presence and footprint and all the data associated with you, and you decide what people do with it. It's like when you send your child to school or to kindergarten or whatever, they have to get an authorization letter from you to take them on a field trip or to do something with them that, it's educate them on something that maybe your family values wouldn't agree with. And so that's what they're trying to do. And so when you're managing this, and I've got experience with a lot of the United States-based CCPA, the new Nevada one, the biometrics one up in Illinois, and several dozen now at this point, states have actually adopted and ratified or aligned with the CCPA. So you're eventually going to see a federal one, I think. But either way, there are a lot of different kind of standards. It's all over the maps. From a United States perspective, CCPA is the most stringent. Globally, GDPR. And so if you're a global organization, what you need to do is you need to lock in on the lowest common denominator. Managing compliance is all about efficiency. So if you have multiple compliance requirements or areas that you have to comply, why not map those across the board and say, okay, well, if we have to, from a data protection perspective, have to meet, say, 4 or 5 different requirements, go to the most stringent one and meet that one, and then you've met all the other ones at the same time, and it makes managing it a little bit easier. So that would be my first recommendation, is just sort of do it at the most fundamental, most difficult, lowest common denominator level, and so. The future of privacy is going to be a battle that is going to be hashed out in the courts, because CCPA, they say that they're going to put all these horrible fines on people, and I understand the Attorney General of California is actually responsible for this, and I've heard rumors that they don't have the staff to be able to enforce it, and blah blah. That may or may not be the case. I don't know. But I think what you're going to see is the first 6 months is kind of going to be a grace period, and then you're going to have some lawsuits, and especially in California, you're going to have people that are going to be suing these companies, looking for a windfall of some sort, and it's going to be hashed out in in case studies and case law and precedent, and that's going to kind of establish what the best practices are, what due diligence looks like from a compliance perspective to CCPA, and then the United States federal government just step in and say, here's the official one from the federal perspective. So we're going to see probably a U.S.-based GDPR version of GDPR here in the next little while, because things are getting a little out of control with what companies are doing with our data. And I think giving us some ownership back, I think, is important. Does it disrupt business? Yeah, it does. But how far do we let it go before we reel it in? And if we let it go too far, does it become too painful to pull that back? So it's something we got to deal with. It's going to be something over the next 5 years that is just going to be that elephant in the room that we're going to have to recognize at some point.
It's I personally view privacy as kind of this inherent right that we should have as people of this country, that we've sold for far too cheap. We sell our data without even knowing we're selling our data half the time. And it's interesting because generationally it's so different now. It's so different, and it's going to only get worse, I think, with time. And it's the cost of business complying with privacy laws in so many different states, especially for not the big giant companies but the smaller businesses, the cost of doing business is only going to increase, and so are the prices, the services, and other things that have to go around with it, and eventually it's going to slow down and cause an economic downshift where government is at that point going to have to get involved and start streamlining it from a federal level.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. And I think at some point they're going to have to sort this out once and for all. And I think California, not that I'm a huge fan of the law itself. It's not bad, but it's better than GDPR. But one thing they did right is they limited the number of the businesses that have to comply. So 20 million is kind of the entry level. So if you make 20 million or more, then you have to comply with CCPA, which is nice, because that way the smaller, the SMB type businesses, they fall outside of that compliance, and as well as they've made exceptions for certain healthcare. Same thing with Nevada. If you're HIPAA or you have regulatory obligations, you're completely exempt from from the Nevada, Consumer Privacy Act altogether. So I think making exceptions for smaller businesses, regulated businesses, is important.
So, kind of switching topics from regulation, I always feel like the CCPA and privacy law can be its own podcast. And
Yes.
and speaking a little bit more about aligning security with the business, how do you do it? What are some of your best practices in aligning security with the business to enhance it and just really build a more robust program?
Okay, and that's a concept that a lot of practitioners and business folks and just people in IT in general have a tough time wrapping their head around the fact that we can align cybersecurity with business. Cybersecurity has always been the group that conserves or protects value for an organization rather than creating value. And I think by aligning with the business, you can do just that. And I hit on a couple points earlier. So if you understand your business's goals, and you can start aligning your control recommendations, the way that you manage risk in alignment with those, whether that's customer satisfaction or speed to market or enhanced brand. So for example, if you were to get us an ISO 27001 certification, for example, that makes you a preferred partner for other businesses. So B2B business becomes easier because you're preferred over somebody else because you already have shown evidence that you take security seriously and privacy seriously and compliance seriously. So it improves your position and your competitive advantage in the marketplace. And so you can also be a good steward of the resources that you've been entrusted with. We just think about spending more and more every year, but if we can make our processes more efficient, and a good example, and technology can help with that, by the way. So a good example, you have a SOC that manages the day-to-day security operations of the organization. And to manage one, say, phishing attack, maybe takes a half an hour because the workflow has you have to do some investigation and some reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, and then you have to reach out to the end user and communicate with the rest of the company and all these steps that you have to go through. But there's SOAR technology, like security orchestration and automation and response, SOAR technology, that allows you to script a lot of that. And you can just do some drag and drop and easily script that entire thing and take a 30-minute task, and you can shrink that down to a 5-minute thing for the SOC. So that reduces, hours. It reduces overhead from a human resource perspective, improves efficiency, allows you to be more proactive, and improves your time to respond and time to recover, and so on. So efficiency equals cost savings. If you can improve your brand, that helps you align and create value for your organization. But it starts with understanding your business. If you don't have the business acumen to understand a business plan and translate that into controls that make sense to your organization, then then back up and figure that out first before you start trying to build a security program.
It's very interesting because, as you know, a lot of times people think of aligning security with the business means aligning security's goals with the business goals. That's one aspect of it. But the other aspect, and something you spoke about kind of before we jumped on the podcast, was creating this unique business value out of security in order to increase the company's resources, security posture, its partnership, its ability to really increase its revenue, is leveraging security to really not only be not a liability and a cost line to the business, but really become a revenue stream for the business. Talk a little bit, share a little bit with our audience what you shared with me the first time you and I spoke, which is more along those lines of how can you take a security program and really take it from a negative line and make it be part that the CFO looks at and goes, that's a well worth investment. It's really helping our business's revenue.
Yeah, and so there's a whole lot of ways to look at this, but I think the main thing is that we need to be creators of value. So it may not be a revenue stream per se, and I'm not sure if that's what you meant or not, but it can be a creator of value. We can create value for the organization through brand enhancement, both internally and both externally. We can save money and conserve money by being efficient with the processes that we create. We can, of course, reduce risk. We can increase nimbleness. We can, be an enabler to the organization. IT nowadays is often looked at as an enabler, but if we can, from a security perspective, partner up with DevOps and with enterprise architecture and simplify our technology stack and to make sure that security is baked into these things and save costs on licensing and on storage and on our data center footprint and reduce risk and make sure that everything that it takes to onboard somebody or remove somebody is managed as effectively as possible. Not only are we managing the cost of security effectively, but we're also driving value. And a really good example is, if we can have processes that help us get to market, get a product to market, whether that's something that you're selling, whether that's software, an actual product itself, because of the efficiency of the processes that we bake into the DevOps or the DevSecOps process. We've created value, even though it may not be in your face, obvious, line item in a P&L or whatever. It's still value because time is money, and the faster you can get to market, the more the more market share and the more you can sell and the more revenue you can generate and the more profitable you'll be.
You're absolutely right, and you've kind of nailed it on the head, which is how can we really align security with the different aspects of the business to really show that we can really create a unique value and positioning for a company. And I think oftentimes as a CISO, like you said, a lot of times, we're reactive rather than proactive. As security folks, we're more concerned with the fire over here or the fire over there or the situation here. And you've kind of given a lot of great examples today, whether it be from, the 10,000 foot zooming down, taking care of the issue, then gumming back up and not getting stuck in the weeds, not staying on the ground. As we kind of wrap up today's podcast, what are some of your best practices? What are some of the stuff that you constantly preach to your team about from a security perspective to really enhance the program and stuff that's, I don't want to say simple, but just what are some of your fundamentals that you always and constantly talk about and insist on? Your best practices.
Okay. So there's as you're saying that, the 100 things are running through my head, and I don't want to get down there into that really tactical, prescriptive sort of level. I want to bring it back up to more of a philosophical perspective. So my definition of security is people following processes and leveraging technology to implement security objectives that reduce risk to levels that are commensurate with the business risk appetite. So it's people following processes and leveraging technology, and our goal is to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our critical assets in the organization. And you do this through, I was talking to a guy today, and he said he talked about a CISSP and how he had studied for it, and we were kind of digging into what made him successful at being able to get that certification. And my light went up again. Here, sorry about that. It has a timer. It's broken, I think. I'm not sure, but anyway.
It's perfect. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So my point is this: is that security is a mindset. Security is a mindset. When you start, so you pass your CISSP because it asks you scenario-based questions. And when you start thinking security, and this person came from like a military, he was like a Navy SEAL or something like that, and we started comparing notes, and their way of looking at security and the cybersecurity way of looking at it were very similar because they were principle-based. And that's the kind of philosophy that I try and teach the team. Layered security is a good example. So, security is not just technical controls. It's administrative, it's organizational, it's procedural. And when you layer these controls at the various layers of the network, so you start at the outside of the perimeter and work your way, into the actual network itself, and then the application at the heart of your data center, and then the actual data itself. You can put layers of controls in there, not just technically. You can have your web application firewall, your IPS, your firewall. You can have a SIM, and then you can have people sitting behind that, and processes like an incident response program that then, you can see this an attack vector developing within your organization, and that's one thing. But do you have the maturity as an organization to then respond to that and to mitigate that before it becomes a business impacting event? So that layer, that sort of mental, that idea, that mentality of security as being a layered approach that implements security objectives that that reduce risks, but not just technical controls, but administrative and organizational and procedural. So I know there's a lot I kind of babbled on about it, but the point is that my philosophy is this: people think that security is technical, and it's not certainly not 100% technical. It's administrative and organizational and procedural. Its goal is not just to be an island unto itself. Its goal is to protect the assets of the organization to the level that the organization says is acceptable or reasonable for that particular company and that particular company's vertical or their budget. And so when I'm having these conversations, because you get down into the lower level and you start talking about budget and what we can afford this year and so on, there's a lot of times there's hums and haws because certain things get cut and other things don't. But at the end of the day, there's so much that you can do with policy, with process, with training, and so on. That doesn't really, it costs money, soft dollars, but doesn't cost hard CapEx type dollars. And you can, a lot of times we overlook that. We bombard our networks with technical controls that are oftentimes underconfigured and underutilized, and we're missing the whole point of the governance side of security, the people following processes. That part is so important.
I love that. People following processes is the basics of a good security program. Is if you can create the right processes in place, get the people to follow it, and like you said, leverage technology to support that, you end up with a solid foundation to continue to build on for a very long time. Like you said, you're in it for the long haul at that point.
Yep. Mature programs. Security is about programs. It's developing programs like disaster recovery, business continuity, incident response, patch management, identity and access management, and it goes on and on and on. And not one of those things is technical, but you need to have those as part of your security program. Of course, tools make that, optimize it, make it efficient and doable, but the security program is really an umbrella of a whole bunch of different programs that are driven by the policies you set at the top.
I love that. Sean, I want to thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. With all the technical difficulties, we've made it to the end of our journey for today's podcast, and I appreciate your wisdom. The fact that you took time out of your busy schedule and day to be with us and share with us all this great stuff. I'm really humbled by it. This has been a great episode. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, James, it's been my pleasure, absolutely. And if you ever want me on again, just let me know. It's been a whole lot of fun. Thank you.
Absolutely. Folks listening, Sean, the CISO at Visionworks, I am having it's that time of day. I need a bourbon. I'm
hearing you. I'm hearing you.
Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can always find more on our website at cyberhubengage.com or through any of our social media channels. Go subscribe. Make sure you share this episode with your friends and peers. Anyone who's looking to get started or is in security, looking at the way to path up, draw and navigate through security to reach that top echelon of leadership, can learn a lot from today's episode. A big thank you to Sean, and a big thank you to Micah for helping us get through some of our technical difficulties today. Happy New Year, guys. We'll be back with so much more next week. Until then, stay tuned and be cyber safe.